was Elliot. I'm delighted to be serving under your chairmanship for the first time, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Arfon on securing this debate. On Monday, in Committee Room 5, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation launched its research on an essentials guarantee. They've tested public opinion, they've worked out the costs of absolutely basic non-housing essentials in Britain today. Food and non-alcoholic drink, electricity and gas, water, clothes and shoes, communications, travel, sundries like cleaning materials. That's the lot. And for a single person, the cost of all that is, they say, £120 a week, which is £35 a week more than universal credit from next month. And it is just for the minimum basic essentials. It is absolutely clear why so many people have to go to food banks. Of course, quite a lot of people don't get the full rate of universal credit because of deductions of one kind or another. And in addition, because of the subject we're debating this afternoon, a growing number have to take money out of their inadequate universal credit payments in order to pay the rent. Local Housing Allowance stops people on universal credit being paid often in housing support anywhere near their rent. It's making life impossible. Since LHA was frozen in 2020 after temporarily being restored to the 30th percentile, as the Honourable Member pointed out, it used to be the 50th before 2011, rent has risen sharply across the country. And DWP data shows that by last August, 57% of private rented households in receipt of housing support have a shortfall between their benefit and the rent, and that proportion is going up. The Work and Pensions Select Committee published a report in July 2022 on the cost of living, just highlighting how support through the LHA is not keeping up with rising rents. And the fact that housing support and current rents are so out of kilter creates, and the Honourable Member often referred to this, what the Institute for Fiscal Studies describes as bizarre consequences. They give an example, one of which is affecting the constituency of my honourable friend, the member for Bristol. They say the 30th percentile of rents in Bristol is £100 more than in Newbury, but the amount of housing support that those who live in Bristol can receive is £12.50 less than those who live in Newbury. This makes no sense. The system has got completely out of touch with the reality. Crisis told the Select Committee about research with Alma Economics before the pandemic, showing that a return to the 30th percentile would benefit the public purse by over £2 billion because it would avoid councils resorting to more costly temporary accommodation. The Honourable Member for Arfon rightly made this point. The National Residential Landlords Association, in its briefing, says we should press the Minister, and I want to join the Honourable Member in doing so. Has the government worked out how much it could save in temporary accommodation costs, how much local authorities would save if the level of local housing allowance was back up at the 30th percentile? And the impacts are getting more severe. Shelter has warned this year that, and I quote, the continued freeze on housing benefits is pushing more and more private renters towards homelessness. The number approaching them with rent arrears is up 30%. Crisis says the affordability gap is driving homelessness and reports evictions from the private sector more than doubling in the last year. Government figures last month showed the first increase for 4 years in the number of rough sleepers. In London, there was a 34% increase in the number of rough sleepers. The government says it's committed to ending rough sleeping, but its policies, and particularly this policy, are increasing rough sleeping. People in households with a disabled person are more likely to be hit by LHA shortfalls. Paul Sylvester, the head of housing operations at Bristol City Council, told our committee in 2021 that half the households they saw with a shortfall included a disabled person. They were increasingly seeing disabled people forced to use their disability benefits to cover the rent top-up rather than what they're supposed to be used for. Discretionary housing payments can be used by local councils to support households at risk of homelessness. This financial year, the DHP budget has been cut by 29%. And Shelter has said echoing again the honourable member, a number of councils appear on the brink of running out of funding. 31 English councils had spent over 3/4 of their budget on DHP before the winter began. They included traditionally low-rent areas, Derbyshire Dales, Leicester, Hinckley and Bosworth, all spent over 80% of their annual allocation in the first 6 months. The East Midlands, where they are all located, had the highest rate of private rent inflation in the last year, just over 5%. In the North East, in your area, Ms Elliott, Sunderland, Gateshead, Northumberland, all spent more than 90% of their DHP allocation by the end of September. So the budget, sadly, today has done absolutely nothing to help. The government must stop turning a blind eye to this very, very serious problem. Recognise that local housing allowance must go up at least to the 30th percentile, and once it's got up to that, it needs to be kept there.